The fluorescent lights of courtroom 4B in the county family court buzzed softly overhead as 7-year-old Emma Martinez pressed herself into the hard wooden chair in the back corner. Her small hands clutched a faded stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3, Mr. Hoppy, with one eye missing and an ear that had been sewn back on twice. Beside her, a beautiful golden retriever named Bailey rested his large head on her lap, his warm brown eyes watching her face with the kind of attention that only dogs can give. Bailey wore an official blue vest with patches that read "Therapy Dog" and "Do Not Pet While Working." His presence was the only thing keeping Emma from completely falling apart. The courtroom smelled like old wood and something bitter, maybe fear, maybe sadness. Emma wasn't sure. All she knew was that this place had become the center of her entire world for the past 3 months, and she hated every single moment of it. At the front of the courtroom, behind an imposing wooden bench that seemed to touch the ceiling, sat Judge. She was a woman in her late 50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, reading glasses perched on her nose, and an expression that revealed nothing. Emma had learned that judges were supposed to be fair, supposed to listen, supposed to protect children. But how could anyone protect her when she was too terrified to tell the truth? On one side of the courtroom sat her mother, Sarah Martinez. At 34 years old, Sarah looked like she'd aged a decade in the past year. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands twisted a tissue over and over in her lap. She wore a simple navy dress and small pearl earrings, the earrings Emma's grandmother had given her. Emma could see her mother's leg bouncing nervously under the table, a habit she'd developed since the divorce proceedings began. Sarah's attorney, a kind woman named Ms. with curly red hair, was reviewing documents and occasionally patting Sarah's hand reassuringly. On the other side sat her father, David Martinez. Unlike Sarah, David looked polished and confident. His dark suit was pressed to perfection, his tie was a power red, and his shoes were so shiny Emma could probably see her reflection in them. He sat with his back straight, occasionally whispering to his attorney, a sharp-looking man named Mr. Hutchinson who wore expensive cologne that Emma could smell from across the room. David's face wore what Emma had come to think of as his court smile, warm, friendly, the picture of a concerned father. But Emma knew better. The custody battle had been going on for 93 days. Emma knew because she'd been counting. 93 days of being asked where she wanted to live. 93 days of supervised visits. 93 days of therapists and child advocates and lawyers all trying to figure out what was best for the child. That child was her, but nobody seemed to actually ask her what she needed. Or maybe they did ask, but she was too afraid to answer. "Your Honor," Mr. Hutchinson stood, his voice smooth and practiced. "We'd like to call Mr. David Martinez to the stand to testify regarding his parenting capabilities and the home environment he has established for his daughter." Emma's body went rigid. Her fingers, which had been gently stroking Mr. Hoppy's worn fur, suddenly gripped. Bailey, ever attentive, lifted his head slightly, his ears perking up. The dog had been Emma's companion for the past 6 months, assigned by Dr. Michael, the court-appointed child psychologist who'd noticed that Emma had become almost completely nonverbal during the proceedings. Doctor sat in the middle section of the courtroom, his notepad open, watching Emma with concerned eyes. He was a gentle man in his 40s who always wore sweater vests and spoke in a soft voice. He'd been the one to suggest Bailey, believing that the therapy dog program might help Emma feel safe enough to express herself. What Doctor didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Emma had turned Bailey into something more than just a comfort animal. As David Martinez stood and walked toward the witness stand, Emma's heart began to pound in her chest. She could hear it in her ears, feel it in her throat. Her father moved with confidence, nodding respectfully to the judge, placing his hand on the Bible as the bailiff swore him in. From across the courtroom, he glanced at Emma and gave her a small smile, the kind that other people would interpret as fatherly love. But Emma saw something else in his eyes, a warning, a reminder. Her small hand, hidden from view by Bailey's large body, moved to the top of the dog's head. Her fingers began a specific pattern she'd spent months perfecting. 2 taps on the crown of his head, right between his ears. Pause. 3 taps on his left ear. Pause. 1 firm tap on his right ear. It was a pattern no one would notice, just a little girl nervously petting her therapy dog. But for Emma and Bailey, it meant everything. It was her danger signal. Bailey's transformation was immediate but subtle. His body, which had been relaxed against Emma's legs, suddenly tensed. His ears, which had been in a neutral position, flattened slightly against his head. His tail, which had been gently wagging, went still. The dog stood up slowly, deliberately, and positioned himself between Emma and her father, who was now seated in the witness stand, some 40 feet away. From deep in Bailey's chest came a sound that Emma had only heard twice before during their private training sessions. A low, rumbling growl. It wasn't loud enough for most of the courtroom to hear, but it was there. A warning. Judge, who had been preparing to begin questioning, paused. Her sharp eyes moved from the witness stand to the back of the courtroom where Emma sat. She'd been a family court judge for 20 years, handling some of the most difficult custody battles in county. She developed an instinct for when something was wrong, when the truth was hiding beneath the surface. And right now, every instinct she had was screaming at her. "Is there a problem with the therapy dog?" Mr. Hutchinson asked, his tone carrying a hint of annoyance. The question drew attention to Emma's corner of the courtroom. Several heads turned to look. Sarah Martinez half rose from her chair, concern etched on her face. David Martinez's expression flickered, just for a second, with something that might have been anger before the court's smile returned. But Judge raised her hand, calling for silence without saying a word. She watched Bailey carefully. The dog hadn't barked, hadn't lunged, hadn't done anything that would cause alarm. But his body language had completely changed. His stance was protective, almost defensive. His eyes were locked not on Emma, but on David Martinez in the witness stand. Judge had 3 therapy dogs of her own at home. She knew canine behavior, and what she was seeing didn't make sense, unless the dog was responding to a genuine threat. But from whom? David Martinez was sitting calmly in the witness stand, looking confused and slightly concerned. He appeared to be the picture of a worried father wondering why his daughter's therapy dog was acting strangely. Emma's hands continued to rest on Bailey's fur, but Judge noticed they were trembling. The little girl's face was pale, her eyes downcast, her entire body language screaming fear. But fear of what? The courtroom proceedings, the decision ahead, or something, someone else. In the back row, Susan Mitchell, the certified therapy dog handler and retired K-9 officer who had trained Bailey, leaned forward in her seat. She'd been present at every hearing, ensuring Bailey's behavior remained appropriate for the courtroom setting. But what she was witnessing now made her blood run cold. She'd worked with Bailey for 3 years. She knew his signals, his responses, his training. What she was seeing wasn't standard therapy dog behavior. It was protection mode, the kind of response K-9 units were trained to display when their handlers were in danger. But Susan had never trained Bailey for protection work. He was a therapy dog, gentle and calm, selected specifically for his even temperament. So where had this response come from? Judge made a decision. "We'll take a 10-minute recess," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who would not be questioned. "Bailiff, please ensure everyone remains in the building." As people began to stand and stretch, Judge caught Susan Mitchell's eye and gave a subtle nod toward her chambers. The handler understood immediately and moved quickly toward the judge's private office. Emma remained frozen in her chair, her hand still on Bailey's head. The dog hadn't relaxed. He stood like a sentinel, watching David Martinez as he stepped down from the witness stand and walked toward his attorney's table. As David passed within 20 feet of Emma, Bailey's growl returned, slightly louder this time. David stopped, looking at the dog with an expression of bewilderment. "I don't understand what's wrong with the animal," he said, his voice carrying just the right note of concerned confusion. "I've always been good with dogs." But Emma knew the truth, and somehow, impossibly, Bailey knew it too. As the courtroom emptied for the recess, Emma buried her face in Bailey's fur and whispered words no one could hear. "Good boy. You're such a good boy. Please keep me safe." The dog's tail wagged once, a small acknowledgement, but his vigilant watch didn't break. In the hallway outside, Judge was about to have a conversation with Susan Mitchell that would change everything. The silent warning had been given. Now someone just needed to understand what it meant. The clock on the courtroom wall ticked loudly in the sudden quiet. 10 minutes to figure out what a 7-year-old girl and her dog were trying so desperately to communicate. 10 minutes that would determine whether the truth would finally come to light, or whether Emma would be forced to return to the very danger she'd been signaling all along. Judge closed the heavy oak door of her chambers behind Susan Mitchell, the sound echoing with finality in the quiet space. Her private office was a stark contrast to the formal courtroom, shelves lined with law books, family photos on her desk showing her own 3 grown children, and a worn leather chair that had molded to her shape over 2 decades of difficult decisions. But there was no time for comfort now. "Talk to me," Judge said, moving behind her desk but remaining standing, her arms crossed. "I've had therapy dogs in my courtroom for 8 years. I've never seen a reaction like that." Susan Mitchell was a woman in her early 50s, her short gray hair practical and no-nonsense, her posture still military, straight from her 25 years as a K-9 officer with the Austin Police Department. She'd seen more than most people could imagine: drug busts, search and rescue operations, violent criminal apprehensions. She'd worked with German Shepherds, Belgian bloodhounds. After retiring, she dedicated herself to therapy dog training, believing in the healing power of the human-animal bond. But right now, her weathered face showed something she rarely displayed: uncertainty mixed with deep concern. "Your Honor, I trained Bailey myself," Susan began, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "He went through 18 months of intensive therapy dog certification. He's worked with children in hospitals, with veterans suffering from PTSD, with trauma survivors in crisis centers. I selected him specifically for his calm, gentle temperament. He's never, and I mean never, shown protective aggression." "Until today," Judge finished, her sharp eyes studying Susan's face. "Until today," Susan confirmed. She moved closer to the desk, her hands gesturing as she spoke, trying to make the judge understand the significance of what they'd witnessed. "Bailey's response wasn't random, Judge. That was targeted, specific protection behavior, the kind of response that requires either intensive training or," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "or a genuine recognition of threat." Judge felt a chill run down her spine despite the warmth of her chambers. She'd been practicing family law long enough to know that sometimes the most important evidence wasn't what was said in testimony, but what was communicated in silence. Body language, behavioral cues, the things that couldn't be rehearsed or scripted. "You think the dog perceives David Martinez as a threat to Emma," the judge said. It wasn't a question. "I think something is triggering a protective response in Bailey, yes," Susan said carefully. "But here's what's bothering me most, Your Honor. I've reviewed all of Bailey's sessions with Emma over the past 6 months. According to the records, Emma has been remarkably attached to him, but there's been nothing in his behavior reports that would indicate protection training. Therapy dogs are specifically trained not to show aggression or protective behaviors. We want them to be comforting, not defensive. So where did this behavior come from?" Judge moved to her window, looking out at the courthouse grounds where a few people from the courtroom had gathered during the recess, smoking cigarettes and checking their phones. She could see David Martinez standing alone near a bench, typing something on his cell phone, his posture relaxed and confident. Susan took a deep breath. "I think Emma taught him." The judge turned sharply from the window. "A 7-year-old child trained a therapy dog for protection. How is that even possible?" "Dogs bond with children differently than with adults," Susan explained, moving to stand beside the judge at the window. They're incredibly perceptive to emotional states, especially fear and anxiety. If Emma has been afraid, truly, deeply afraid, Bailey would sense that. And if she's been working with him, spending time with him, teaching him specific signals. Susan trailed off, the implications hanging heavy in the air. "What are you suggesting?" Judd asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. "I'm suggesting that we're looking at a child who is so frightened that she created her own protection system because she didn't believe anyone would help her otherwise." Susan's voice cracked slightly on the last words. "Your Honor, I've worked with abuse victims. This level of strategic self-protection in a child this young, it's not normal. Children Emma's age should feel safe enough to tell adults when they're scared. But if she's been conditioned to believe that telling won't help, or worse, that telling will make things worse." The judge's jaw tightened. She'd seen too many cases where children suffered in silence because they were too afraid to speak up, or because the adults around them were too blind to see the signs. "You said Bailey's response was targeted. What exactly did you observe?" "Everything changed the moment David Martinez stood up to take the witness stand," Susan said, her training kicking in as she recalled the details with precision. Emma's hand moved in a very specific pattern on Bailey's head. It wasn't random petting, it was deliberate. 2 movements, pause, 3 movements, pause, 1 movement. That's a sequence, Your Honor. That's a signal. Judge felt her heart rate increase. "Show me. Use your hand like she did." Susan demonstrated the pattern in the air, her fingers moving as she'd observed Emma's doing. It was subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice, just a girl nervously petting her dog. But Bailey's response was immediate. Body tense, ears back, positioning himself as a physical barrier between Emma and her father, and that low growl. Classic protection behavior. Could it have been coincidental? Maybe the dog just needed to stretch or was uncomfortable. Even as the judge asked, she knew she was grasping at straws. "Watch what happens when we go back," Susan said grimly. "If I'm right about this being a trained response to a specific signal, it will happen again. Every single time Emma feels threatened and gives that signal." A knock on the door interrupted them. The bailiff, a heavy-set man named who'd worked in the courthouse for 15 years, stuck his head in. "Judge, we're at 8 minutes on the recess. The attorneys are asking about reconvening." "I need you to do something for me," Judge said, her mind working rapidly. "When we go back in, I want you to watch that little girl in the back corner. Not the dog, the girl. Watch her hands, her body language, her reactions. And note specifically when those reactions occur. Can you do that?" Who had children and of his own nodded seriously. "Yes, ma'am. You think something's wrong?" "I think we need to pay very close attention," the judge replied diplomatically. Back in the courtroom, the 10-minute recess was ending. People filed back to their seats, attorneys shuffled papers, court reporters flexed their fingers in preparation for more testimony. Emma remained exactly where she'd been, curled into her chair with Bailey pressed against her legs. The dog's eyes tracked every movement in the courtroom, but especially the movements of David Martinez. Sarah Martinez had spent the recess crying in the women's bathroom with Ms., her attorney. "Something's wrong," Sarah had whispered desperately. "Did you see Emma's face? Did you see how Bailey reacted? I've been telling you for months that David has been hurting her, but she won't say anything when anyone asks. She's terrified of him." Ms. had heard similar claims from dozens of parents in custody disputes. Sometimes they were true, sometimes they were exaggerated, and sometimes they were fabricated. But there had been something about that dog's reaction that had made her pause. "I believe you," she'd said finally. "But we need Emma to tell us what's happening. We need evidence." Now back in the courtroom, Ms. watched Emma with new intensity. The little girl's eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale. She hadn't moved from her protective corner, hadn't gone to the bathroom, hadn't asked for water. She just sat there, one hand on her stuffed rabbit, one hand on Bailey's fur. "All rise," called out as Judge entered and took her seat at the bench. The judge's expression was unreadable, but those who knew her well could sense the heightened alertness in her posture. "Mr. Hutchinson, you may continue with your witness," Judge said, settling into her chair. But her attention was split. Part of her listened to the legal proceedings, but a significant part watched the back corner of the courtroom where a small girl and a golden retriever sat in silence. David Martinez returned to the witness stand, that confident smile back on his face. He began speaking about the home he'd prepared for Emma, a 4-bedroom house in a good school district, a bedroom already decorated in purple, Emma's favorite color, he noted, a backyard with a swing set. He talked about his stable job as an accountant at a prestigious firm, his involvement in the community, his dedication to being a good father. "Mr. Martinez," his attorney asked, "can you describe your relationship with your daughter?" "Emma is my world," David said, and his voice carried just the right amount of emotion. "I love her more than anything. This divorce has been hard on her, I know, but I want her to know that her daddy will always be there for her. I've worked hard to create a stable, loving environment where she can thrive." As he spoke, his eyes drifted to the back of the courtroom, making contact with Emma. The look lasted only a second, but it was enough. Emma's small hand moved across Bailey's head. 2 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, 1 tap. Bailey stood up so fast it startled the people in nearby seats. The dog positioned himself squarely between Emma and her father, his body rigid, his ears flat against his head. This time the growl was louder, loud enough that several people in the courtroom turned to look. It wasn't a vicious sound, but it was unmistakable. A warning, a protection. Judge sat forward in her chair, her eyes locked on the scene. The bailiff had pulled out a small notepad and was writing quickly, documenting exactly what he'd observed. "Your Honor," Mr. Hutchinson said, his tone sharp with irritation, "I must object to this disruption. The therapy dog is clearly creating a disturbance." "The dog is doing exactly what he's supposed to do," Judge cut him off, her voice carrying an edge that made even the experienced attorney step back. "He's responding to the needs of the child he's assigned to protect." Sarah Martinez had started crying again, but this time with something that might have been hope. Ms. was scribbling furiously on her legal pad, her mind racing through the implications of what they were witnessing. Dr. the child psychologist had moved forward in his seat, his professional training kicking in. He'd worked with Emma for months, trying to get her to open up about her fears, her anxieties, her reluctance to express any preference between her parents. The girl had been warm with her mother, neutral but distant with him and other adults, and completely shut down around her father. He documented the behavior but hadn't had concrete evidence of why it occurred. Now, watching Bailey's targeted protective response, pieces were clicking into place. David Martinez, still in the witness stand, spread his hands in a gesture of confused innocence. "I don't understand what's happening. I've never done anything to hurt my daughter. Maybe the dog is picking up on Emma's anxiety about the court proceedings. Children can be stressed by." "Mr. Martinez," Judge interrupted, her voice like ice, "please refrain from speculating about the dog's behavior. Doctor, I'd like you to take Emma and Bailey to the children's conference room. Ms. Mitchell, please accompany them." Susan Mitchell was already moving toward Emma, her training and instincts in full protection mode. As she approached, she knelt down to Emma's level, her voice soft and reassuring. "Hey there, sweetheart. You and Bailey are doing such a good job. Would you like to come with me to a quieter room? We can get you some juice and crackers if you're hungry." Emma looked up at Susan with eyes that held far too much knowledge for a 7-year-old. She nodded silently, standing up while keeping one hand firmly gripping Bailey's vest. The dog moved with her, maintaining his position between Emma and the front of the courtroom, between Emma and her father. As the trio made their way toward the side door that led to the children's conference room, every person in the courtroom watched. And as they passed the section where David Martinez sat, Bailey's response was immediate and unmistakable. The dog stopped, planted his feet and let out 3 sharp, clear barks, not playful, not random, protective, a warning that everyone in the courtroom heard and understood. The door closed behind Emma, Bailey, and Susan, leaving a courtroom full of people who were finally starting to understand that something much darker than a simple custody dispute was unfolding before their eyes. Judge looked at the attorneys, at the parents, at the court reporter whose hands had frozen over her keyboard. "We're going to get to the bottom of this," she said quietly but firmly. "And we're going to do it right now." The truth was coming, and there would be no more silence. The children's conference room was nothing like the imposing courtroom they'd just left. Painted in soft yellow with white clouds on the ceiling, it had been designed to put children at ease during the trauma of family court proceedings. Colorful beanbag chairs sat in one corner, shelves held books and toys, and a small table with child-sized chairs occupied the center of the room. Large windows let in natural sunlight, and the door had a window panel so adults could see in while still giving children a sense of privacy. Emma sat in one of the beanbag chairs, her arms wrapped around Bailey's neck, her face buried in his golden fur. The dog sat perfectly still, his body warm and solid against hers, occasionally licking her ear in that gentle way dogs comfort those they love. Susan Mitchell had pulled up one of the small chairs and sat quietly nearby, not pushing, not demanding, just being present. She'd learned long ago that traumatized children needed space and time before they could trust enough to speak. "Would you like some apple juice, Emma?" Susan asked softly, gesturing to the small refrigerator in the corner. "I think there are some graham crackers too." Emma shook her head slightly but didn't lift her face from Bailey's fur. Her small body was still trembling, the adrenaline of the courtroom encounter slowly wearing off and leaving exhaustion in its wake. Through the window in the door, Doctor observed quietly, his notepad in hand. He'd worked with Emma for 6 months, and in all that time, he'd never seen her this physically affectionate with anyone except her mother. But with Bailey, she was completely uninhibited. The bond between the girl and the dog was extraordinary, something that went beyond typical therapy animal attachment. Susan shifted slightly in her chair, keeping her voice calm and even. "Bailey is such a special dog, isn't he?" This time Emma nodded against Bailey's fur. A small response, but a response nonetheless. "I've known Bailey for a long time," Susan continued, her tone conversational, non-threatening. "I helped train him when he was just a puppy. He was always the sweetest dog, gentle with everyone, never aggressive, always wanting to help people feel better. That's why I chose him to be a therapy dog." Emma's grip on Bailey's fur tightened slightly, but she still didn't look up. Susan took a quiet breath, choosing her next words carefully. "But you know what I noticed today, Emma? Bailey did something I've never seen him do before. He protected you. He stood between you and something that scared you, and that's not something I taught him." There was a long silence. Outside the room, Doctor leaned closer to the window, his professional instincts telling him something significant was about to happen. Finally, in a voice so small it was barely audible, Emma whispered, "I taught him." Susan's heart clenched, but she kept her expression neutral, supportive. "You taught Bailey to protect you." Emma nodded against the dog's fur, and then, slowly, she lifted her head. Her brown eyes were red and swollen from crying, her dark hair was tangled, and her face showed the kind of weariness that no 7-year-old should ever have to carry. "How did you teach him, sweetie?" Susan asked gently. Emma's small hand moved to Bailey's head, and her fingers began to move in that now familiar pattern. 2 taps on the crown of his head. Pause. 3 taps on his left ear. Pause. 1 tap on his right ear. As if on cue, Bailey's body tensed, his ears went back, and he shifted his position to be more squarely in front of Emma, his eyes focused on the door. "Good boy," Emma whispered and gave him a different signal, a long stroke down his back. Bailey immediately relaxed, his tail wagging, his tongue lolling out in a happy dog smile. Susan felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them away. The sophistication of what she was witnessing was stunning. This child had developed a complete communication system with this dog, a danger signal and an all-clear signal. That's amazing, Emma. You're very smart. How did you figure out how to teach Bailey that? Emma's voice was still quiet, but there was a hint of pride in it, the pride of a child who had accomplished something difficult. I watched videos on Mommy's phone, videos about training dogs, and I practiced with Bailey during our sessions. At first, he didn't understand, but I kept doing it and I gave him treats when he did what I wanted. And then he learned. What does your signal mean? Susan asked, though she already knew the answer. Emma looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together. It means danger. It means I'm scared. It means he needs to protect me. Protect you from what, sweetheart? The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity. Through the window, Doctor saw Emma's shoulders begin to shake. He made a move toward the door, but Susan held up one hand, signaling him to wait. This moment was fragile, delicate, and interrupting it could shatter whatever trust Emma was building. "From Daddy," Emma finally whispered, and the words hung in the air like shattered glass. Susan's training kicked in immediately. She needed to be careful here, to ask open-ended questions that didn't lead or suggest, to document everything properly, to ensure that whatever Emma said could be used to protect her. "Your daddy scares you." Emma nodded, and then the words began to spill out, faster now, as if a dam had broken. "He gets so angry. Not at court, he's nice at court, but when we're alone, when Mommy's not there. He yells so loud and his face gets red and scary, and he punches walls, and once he threw a glass and it broke everywhere and I had to clean it up, and he said if I told anyone he would make sure I never saw Mommy again." Susan kept her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. "Has your daddy ever hurt you physically, Emma? Has he ever hit you or pushed you?" Emma pulled up the sleeve of her cardigan, a cardigan she'd been wearing despite the Texas heat. On her upper arm, fatting but still visible, were the yellowish-green remnants of finger-shaped bruises. "He grabbed me really hard because I spilled juice on the carpet. It hurt so much and I cried, but he said I was being a baby and that good girls don't cry over nothing." Through the window, Doctor was already pulling out his phone, texting Judge. "Need immediate medical documentation. Visible bruising. Possible abuse disclosure." "When did this happen, Emma?" Susan asked, her voice still gentle despite her inner turmoil. I think, maybe 2 weeks ago, at Daddy's apartment during my visit. The social worker lady was in the living room, but this was in the kitchen. She didn't see." "And you've been wearing long sleeves since then?" Emma nodded. "So nobody would ask questions. Daddy said if anyone saw, they would blame Mommy and take me away from her and put me with strangers. He said it was our secret." Susan took a slow breath. "Emma, you did nothing wrong, nothing at all. And what your daddy said isn't true. When someone hurts you, it's always okay to tell, and we're going to make sure you're safe. But I need to ask you, why didn't you tell me or Doctor or the judge about this before?" Emma's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Because I tried. At the beginning, when the court stuff started, I told the first lady they made me talk to. I told her Daddy scared me and yelled a lot. And she asked Daddy about it, and he said I was just upset about the divorce and making up stories because I was angry. And then at the next visit, Daddy told me that if I kept lying about him, I would be in big trouble. He said people don't believe little girls who make up stories. He said I needed to be a good girl and stop telling lies." "So you stopped telling," Susan said softly, understanding dawning. "I stopped using words," Emma corrected, her voice gaining a strange kind of strength. "But I didn't stop telling. I just found a different way. I taught Bailey to speak for me." The brilliance and tragedy of it hit Susan all at once. This child had been silenced by fear and manipulation, so she'd created an alternative communication system, one that couldn't be dismissed as easily as her words had been. A dog's protective behavior was instinctive, observable, undeniable. Emma had been screaming for help in the only language she thought people would finally hear. "You are one of the bravest girls I've ever met," Susan said, and meant every word. "And I promise you, Emma, we hear you now. Bailey helped us hear you, and we're going to keep you safe." "Will I have to go back to Daddy's apartment?" Emma asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "Not today. Not until we figure out what's really been happening. Judge is a very good judge. She cares about keeping children safe. And now that we know what's going on, we can help." Doctor quietly entered the room, kneeling down beside Emma's beanbag chair. "Emma, I am so sorry that you tried to tell us before and we didn't listen well enough. That was our failure, not yours. But I promise you, we're listening now." Emma looked between Susan and Doctor, her young face trying to determine if she could trust these adults who said they would help. Bailey, sensing her uncertainty, nuzzled against her hand, and Emma gave him the all-clear signal, that long stroke down his back. "Can Bailey stay with me?" Emma asked. "Whatever happens, can he stay?" "Absolutely," Susan promised. "Bailey isn't going anywhere without you." Back in the courtroom, Judge was reading Doctor's text message, her face growing darker with each word. She looked up at the parents sitting on opposite sides of the aisle, Sarah Martinez with hope and terror warring on her face, David Martinez with growing concern that his carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. The bailiff approached the bench with his notepad. "Your Honor, as requested, I documented everything." The little girl's hand movements preceded the dog's protective response by approximately 2 seconds each time. 3 separate occurrences. The pattern was identical each time. Judge nodded grimly. "Thank you." She looked at both attorneys. "We need to pause this hearing. I'm ordering an immediate medical examination of the child and a full investigation by Child Protective Services. Mr. Martinez, you are not to have any contact with your daughter pending this investigation." David Martinez shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. Based on what? The behavior of a dog. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," Judge cut him off, her voice carrying the full weight of her authority. "And I suggest you exercise it, because right now that dog has shown more credibility than you have, and we're about to find out exactly why." In the children's conference room, Emma sat with Bailey's head in her lap, finally feeling the first fragile sense of safety she'd experienced in months. She taught a dog to speak for her when no one would listen to her words. And finally, miraculously, someone had learned to understand the language of protection, fear, and desperate hope that she and Bailey had created together. The secret code had been revealed, and now, at last, the truth would follow. The atmosphere in courtroom 4B had transformed from formal legal proceeding to something far more volatile. Judge sat at her bench, her weathered hands folded in front of her eyes sharp as broken glass as they moved between the two attorneys and their clients. 20 years on the family court bench had taught her to maintain composure, even in the most emotionally charged situations. But what she'd witnessed in the past hour had shaken something fundamental in her understanding of this case. David Martinez stood rigidly beside his attorney's table, his perfectly pressed suit now seeming like a costume rather than professional attire. The confident smile that had been his constant companion throughout the proceedings had vanished, replaced by something harder, colder. His jaw was clenched so tight that the muscles twitched visibly, and his hands, those hands that Emma had said grabbed her arm with bruising force, were balled into white-knuckled fists at his sides. "Your Honor, this is absolutely preposterous," Mr. Hutchinson said, his expensive cologne suddenly seeming cloying in the tense air of the courtroom. "You're suggesting we halt these proceedings based on the behavior of an animal. My client has extensive evaluation. He's submitted to supervised visitation. He's done everything asked of him. And now, because a dog barked, you're treating him like a criminal." "The dog didn't just bark, Counselor," Judge said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge that made even the experienced attorney step back slightly. "That animal displayed specific, targeted protective behavior in response to your client's presence and actions. Behavior that, According to the dog's trainer, a woman with 25 years of K9 experience is completely outside the animal's training and temperament. Sarah Martinez sat at her table, her body shaking with silent sobs, her hands pressed over her mouth as if trying to hold back a scream of vindication and horror combined. Ms., her attorney, had one arm around Sarah's shoulders, but the red-haired woman's face was set with grim determination as she shuffled through documents on her table. "Your Honor," Ms. stood, her voice steady and clear, "my client has been alleging abuse for 8 months. 8 months. We've submitted testimony from Emma's teachers noting concerning behavior changes. We've documented Emma's reluctance to go to supervised visits. We've provided statements from neighbors who have heard yelling and sounds of objects breaking from Mr. Martinez's apartment. But at every turn, we've been told we need concrete evidence. Well, Your Honor, we now have a child who has disclosed abuse, who has visible bruising, and who has been so desperate to communicate her fear that she trained a therapy dog to protect her." "Those are serious allegations," Judge said, "which is exactly why I've ordered an immediate investigation. Doctor is with Emma now, documenting her disclosure and photographing the visible injuries. I've already contacted Child Protective Services." "This is a witch hunt." David Martinez's voice exploded through the courtroom, making several people jump. His carefully maintained composure had finally cracked, and what emerged was raw and ugly. "My own daughter has been coached by her mother to make up lies about me. This whole thing is a setup." "Mr. Martinez," Judge said sharply, "I warned you to remain silent. Sit down." But David was past listening. Months of playing the role of the perfect father, of moderating his behavior, of carefully controlling his image had built up pressure that was now erupting. "I have rights. I'm her father. Some dog acts up and suddenly I'm being accused of child abuse. This is insane." His voice had risen to a near shout, and the volume alone was telling. Judge watched with clinical detachment as David's face flushed red, as his body language shifted from defensive to aggressive, as his mask of civility dissolved to reveal something much uglier underneath. And in the children's conference room down the hall, Emma heard it. The soundproofing in the courthouse was good but not perfect, and David Martinez's voice carried when he was angry. Emma, who had been sitting quietly with Bailey drawing pictures with crayons Doctor had provided, suddenly went rigid. Her small hand flew to Bailey's head, fingers moving in that desperate pattern. 2 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, 1 tap. Bailey was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between Emma and the door, a low growl building in his chest. Doctor, who had been reviewing his notes in the corner, immediately moved to Emma's side, kneeling down. "Emma, you're safe here," he said softly. "That's your father's voice, but he can't get to you. Bailey knows you're safe. Can you give him the safe signal?" But Emma was frozen, her eyes wide with fear, her breathing rapid and shallow. She'd heard that voice too many times, the voice that came before the yelling, before the wall punching, before the grabbed arms and the threats and the tears. Her small body began to shake. "Emma, look at me," Doctor said gently but firmly, positioning himself in her line of sight. "You are safe. Bailey is here. Susan is here. I am here. And we are not going to let anything happen to you. Can you take a deep breath with me?" Susan Mitchell, who had stepped out to make phone calls, came rushing back into the room at the sound of Bailey's protective barking. She took in the situation immediately, Emma in the middle of a panic response, Bailey in full protection mode, the sound of David Martinez's angry voice still echoing from down the hall. "That son of a," Susan caught herself, remembering the child present. She knelt on Emma's other side, her voice calm and authoritative. "Emma, honey, listen to my voice. Your daddy is in the courtroom. You are in here. There are locked doors between you and him. There are adults whose job is to keep you safe. He cannot get to you. Do you understand?" Emma nodded shakily, but her hand remained on Bailey's head, the danger signal held constant. "Now," Susan continued, I need you to be brave one more time. I need you to show Bailey that you're okay so he can relax. Because right now you're telling him you're in danger and that's making him worried. But you're not in danger right now. You're safe. Can you give him the safe signal?" It took a long moment, but finally, Emma's trembling hand moved down Bailey's back in that long, smooth stroke. The dog's body relaxed slightly, though he remained alert, his eyes still on the door. "Good girl," Susan said softly. "So brave, so brave." Back in the courtroom, David Martinez's outburst had given Judge exactly what she needed to see. The transformation from composed professional to raging, confrontational man had been dramatic and revealing. This was what Emma saw behind closed doors. This was what no amount of supervised visitation could fully reveal because people like David Martinez were experts at controlling their image in public. "Mr. Martinez," the judge said, her voice like ice, "your behavior in the last 3 minutes has been more informative than 3 months of testimony. You will sit down, you will be silent, or you will be held in contempt of court. Do I make myself clear?" Mr. Hutchinson grabbed his client's arm, pulling him down into his chair. "David, for God's sake, shut up," he hissed urgently. The attorney's face had gone pale. He'd dealt with difficult clients before, but this public display of aggression in front of a judge was potentially catastrophic. David sat, but his body remained tense, coiled, his breathing heavy. The facade had cracked, and everyone in the courtroom had seen what lay beneath. Judge turned her attention to Sarah Martinez. "Mrs. Martinez, can you tell me, has your daughter witnessed behavior similar to what we just saw from your ex-husband?" Sarah nodded, wiping tears from her face. "Yes, Your Honor. That's exactly what Emma has been living with during visitation. He controls himself in front of the social workers, but the moment they're not looking or if something frustrates him, he explodes. And Emma," her voice broke, "Emma has been trying to tell people, but she's 7 years old and she's terrified, and when adults didn't believe her words, she found another way to communicate." Ms. stood again. "Your Honor, we have a pediatrician's report from 8 months ago documenting bruising on Emma's upper arm. At the time, Mr. Martinez claimed it was from playground equipment. We also have 3 separate incident reports from Emma's school about her wearing long sleeves even in 90-degree heat, specifically after visitation weekends with her father." "I want all of that documentation," Judge ordered. "Everything. School reports, medical records, therapist notes, social worker observations. I want a complete picture of this child's last year." The bailiff approached the bench with a note. He handed it to the judge discreetly, and her expression darkened as she read it. The note was from Susan Mitchell. Emma experienced panic response when she heard father's raised voice from conference room. Activated danger signal. Currently stabilized but clearly traumatized by his vocal tone alone. Judge set down the note and looked at David Martinez with an expression that had made hardened criminals confess their crimes. "Mr. Martinez, your daughter heard your outburst from the children's conference room down the hall. Do you know what happened?" David's jaw worked, but he remained silent, his attorney's hand still firmly gripping his arm. "She went into what her psychologist describes as a panic response," the judge continued, her voice quiet but carrying through the silent courtroom. "A 7-year-old child, in a locked room, surrounded by adults whose job is to protect her, still went into panic mode at the sound of your angry voice. Does that sound like the response of a child who feels safe with her father?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. "This hearing is suspended," Judge announced. "Mr. Martinez, all visitation is immediately suspended pending a full investigation by Child Protective Services, a forensic interview with Emma, and a complete psychological evaluation of your fitness as a parent. You are not to contact your daughter directly or indirectly. You are not to go within 500 feet of her school or her mother's residence. Violation of these terms will result in immediate arrest. Do you understand?" Mr. Hutchinson stood. "Yes, Your Honor, my client understands." "I don't need you to answer for him, counselor. Mr. Martinez, do you understand? David Martinez looked up at the judge, and for just a moment, everyone in the courtroom saw the mask slip completely. There was rage there, barely controlled fury at being exposed, at losing control of the narrative. But there was also something else: fear. The fear of a man who knows his carefully constructed lies are unraveling. I understand, he bit out through clenched teeth. Then we're adjourned, Judge said, bringing down her gavel with a sharp crack that sounded like a gunshot in the tense courtroom. As people began to file out, Sarah Martinez collapsed into Miz's arms, sobbing with relief and residual terror. David Martinez sat frozen at his table, his attorney speaking urgently in his ear about damage control and legal strategy. And down the hall in the children's conference room, Emma sat with Bailey's head in her lap, drawing a picture of a little girl and a big golden dog standing together under a rainbow. For the first time in 8 months, she was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, the adults might finally keep her safe. The breaking point had been reached, and on the other side of it, finally, lay the possibility of truth and justice. The forensic interview room at the County Child Advocacy Center was designed to be the opposite of intimidating. Soft yellow walls held cheerful artwork created by other children who had passed through these rooms. Comfortable furniture in child-friendly sizes filled the space, along with toys, stuffed animals, and art supplies. A camera discreetly mounted in the corner would record everything that happened here, not for entertainment, but for justice. This room had heard thousands of children's stories, each one a testament to resilience and survival. Emma sat cross-legged on a large purple cushion, Bailey's warm body pressed against her side. It had been 3 days since the dramatic courtroom hearing, 3 days of Emma staying with her mother under a temporary emergency custody order, 3 days of David Martinez being served with a restraining order and suspension of all parental rights pending investigation. And now, Emma was here to tell her story, completely, fully, without interruption, to someone trained to listen. Jennifer, a forensic interviewer with 15 years of experience, sat across from Emma in a beanbag chair, her posture relaxed and open. Jennifer was in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that had helped hundreds of children find the courage to speak about unspeakable things. She wore casual clothes, jeans, and a soft sweater. Nothing that would make a child feel like this was a formal interrogation. Emma, thank you for being here today, Jennifer began, her voice warm and unhurried. I know it took a lot of courage to come. My job is to listen to kids and believe them. Whatever you tell me today, I'm going to listen and I'm going to believe you. Does that sound okay? Emma nodded, her fingers stroking Bailey's soft ears. The dog had become her lifeline, her translator, her protector. Having him here made the impossible seem possible. I understand you have a very special friend there, Jennifer said, smiling at Bailey. Can you tell me about him? This is Bailey, Emma said softly, her voice still carrying the hesitancy of a child who had learned that speaking could be dangerous. He's my therapy dog. I taught him special signals. Special signals? That sounds really smart. Can you tell me about those? Emma demonstrated the danger signal: 2 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, 1 tap, and Bailey immediately stood, his body shifting into protective mode. Then she showed the all-clear signal and Bailey relaxed, his tail wagging. Wow, Jennifer said with genuine admiration. You taught him that all by yourself. I watched videos, Emma explained, a hint of pride creeping into her voice, on YouTube about dog training, and I practiced during our therapy sessions when nobody was really paying attention. It took a long time, but Bailey is really smart. He learned. Why did you want to teach Bailey those signals? Jennifer asked, her tone curious but not pushy. Emma's small hands twisted together in her lap. This was the hard part, the part where she had to use words instead of signals, where she had to make adults understand what she'd been too afraid to say before. Because nobody believed me when I used words, so I needed Bailey to show them. Show them what, sweetheart? That I was scared, that Daddy hurts me. The words hung in the air, simple, direct, devastating. In the observation room next door, Judge stood with Dr. Susan Mitchell, a CPS investigator named Thomas, and two detectives from the Austin Police Department's Special Victims Unit. They watched through a one-way mirror as the little girl who had been silenced finally found her voice. Jennifer leaned forward slightly, her expression serious and attentive. Emma, I know this is really hard, but it's important that you tell me everything you can remember about how your daddy hurts you. Can you do that? Emma took a deep breath and began to speak. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like water finding cracks in a dam. She told Jennifer about the yelling, how her father's voice would get so loud it made her ears hurt, how he would scream that she was stupid or clumsy or ungrateful. She described how he would punch walls when he was angry, leaving holes in the drywall that he would later cover with pictures or furniture before the social worker's next visit. Once, he threw a glass at the wall right next to my head, Emma said, her voice shaking with the memory. It broke into a million pieces, and some of the glass hit me and cut my arm a little bit. He made me clean it all up, and I was crying because I was scared I'd cut myself more, but he said if I didn't stop crying he'd give me something to really cry about. Jennifer's expression remained calm and supportive, though her heart was breaking for this child. Where was this, Emma? In your daddy's apartment? Yes, in the kitchen. The social worker lady was in the living room watching TV. She didn't see. And what about the bruises that were photographed at the courthouse, the ones on your arm? Can you tell me about those? Emma pulled up her sleeve, though the bruises had faded significantly in the past 3 days. I spilled juice on Daddy's carpet. It was an accident. I was reaching for the remote and my elbow bumped my cup. But Daddy got really, really angry. He grabbed my arm really hard and pulled me up and said I was careless and messy and that he was sick of cleaning up after me. Did it hurt when he grabbed you? Yes, Emma whispered, tears starting to slide down her cheeks. It hurt a lot. I had purple and yellow marks for a long time. That's when I started wearing long sleeves all the time, even when it was hot outside. My teacher asked me once if I was cold and I said yes, but really I was hiding the bruises. Bailey, sensing Emma's distress, nuzzled against her hand. She gave him the all-clear signal, and the dog settled back down, though his watchful eyes never left her face. You're doing such a good job, Emma, Jennifer said gently. I know this is really hard. Can you tell me if your daddy ever hurt you in any other ways? Emma nodded, wiping her nose with her sleeve. Sometimes he would grab my shoulders and shake me when he was yelling, and once he pushed me and I fell down and hit my knee really hard on the coffee table. He said I was clumsy and it was my fault for getting in his way, but really he pushed me. Did anyone see him do that? No, he only does it when nobody is looking. When the social worker is there or when we're in public, he's really nice. He smiles and talks in a soft voice and pretends to be a good daddy. But when we're alone, he's different. It's like he has two faces, a good face for other people and a scary face for me. In the observation room, Detective Maria Santos wrote rapidly in her notebook. She'd worked child abuse cases for 12 years and had seen this pattern countless times. Abusers who were charming and credible in public, monstrous in private. Children like Emma were often disbelieved because their abusers were so skilled at manipulation. Emma, Jennifer continued, did you ever try to tell anyone about what your daddy was doing? Yes, Emma's voice rose with frustration and pain. At the very beginning, when the divorce first happened and they started the custody stuff, I told the first lady they made me talk to. I can't remember her name, but she asked me questions about Mommy and Daddy, and I told her that Daddy yelled a lot and scared me. And you know what happened? What happened? She talked to Daddy about it, and he said I was making it up because I was upset about the divorce. He said I was angry and confused and that kids my age sometimes tell stories. And then the next time I had to go to his apartment, He was so mad. He didn't hit me, but he got really close to my face and yelled that I was a liar, and that if I kept telling lies about him, I would be in big, big trouble. He said nobody believes little girls who make up stories, and that if I kept lying, they would take me away from Mommy and I'd never see her again. That must have been really scary, Jennifer said softly. It was, so I stopped telling people with words, but I didn't stop trying to tell them. I just had to find a different way. That's when I started teaching Bailey. The brilliance and tragedy of Emma's solution struck everyone in the observation room. This 7-year-old child, silenced by fear and manipulation, had created an alternative communication system because she understood that her words alone wouldn't be believed. She'd weaponized the one relationship everyone respected, the bond between a child and a therapy dog, to speak a truth that adults had failed to hear. Jennifer spent another 45 minutes with Emma, carefully documenting every incident the child could remember, the dates, the locations, the circumstances, the injuries. Emma's memory was remarkably detailed for a child her age, but trauma had a way of burning memories into the brain with perfect clarity. "Emma, you've been so incredibly brave today," Jennifer said as the interview drew to a close. "Is there anything else you want people to know?" Emma thought for a moment, then looked directly at the camera she knew was recording everything. "I want people to know that Bailey saved me. When nobody would listen to my words, he showed them the truth. And I want other kids who are scared to know that even if adults don't listen at first, you have to keep trying to tell them. Find any way you can, because somebody somewhere will finally hear you." In the observation room, there wasn't a dry eye. Judge, who had seen the worst of humanity in her courtroom, wiped tears from her cheeks. Susan Mitchell stood with her arms crossed tightly, her jaw clenched with barely controlled emotion. Doctor was making notes, but his hand shook slightly as he wrote. Detective Santos turned to Thomas, the CPS investigator. "We have enough for criminal charges: assault, child endangerment, possible witness intimidation." Nodded. "I'm recommending immediate termination of parental rights proceedings. This isn't a case of a father who needs anger management classes. This is systematic abuse and manipulation." Judge spoke, her voice rough with emotion. "That child in there developed a sophisticated communication system because we, the adults who are supposed to protect her, failed to listen. We failed to see past a manipulative abuser's charm. We subjected her to months of continued contact with her abuser because we required concrete evidence. Well, we have our evidence now, and it came at the cost of that little girl's sense of safety and trust in adults." "She's safe now," Doctor said quietly, "and she will heal. Children are remarkably resilient when they're finally believed and protected." "She shouldn't have had to be this resilient," Judge replied, watching through the glass as Emma hugged Bailey, her small body finally relaxing now that her truth had been told. "But by God, we're going to make sure she never has to use that resilience to survive abuse again." As Emma left the interview room with Bailey by her side, she walked a little taller than she had 3 days ago. The truth was out. The words had been spoken. And for the first time in 8 months, Emma Martinez could begin to imagine a life where she didn't have to be afraid anymore. The truth had come out, painful and complete. And now, the real work of healing and justice could begin. The conference room at the county district attorney's office was filled with documents, photographs, and file folders stacked so high they threatened to topple over. Assistant District Attorney sat at the head of the long table, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the mountain of evidence that had been compiled over the past week. Around the table sat Judge, Detective Maria Santos, CPS Investigator Thomas, Dr. Michael, Susan Mitchell, and Sarah Martinez's attorney, Ms. This wasn't a trial, not yet. But it was the moment when all the scattered pieces of Emma's story would either form a complete picture of abuse or fall apart under scrutiny. Was a prosecutor with a fierce reputation for protecting children. In her 15 years with the DA's office, She'd secured convictions in some of the most difficult child abuse cases in the county. She was methodical, brilliant, and utterly relentless when it came to holding abusers accountable. Now, she looked up from the forensic interview transcript, her dark eyes serious. "Let's start with what we have," began, opening the first file. Emma Martinez's forensic interview was conducted by Jennifer 3 days ago. The interview was recorded, transcribed, and reviewed by 3 separate child abuse experts. All 3 agree that Emma's testimony shows indicators of truthfulness, consistent details, age-appropriate language, sensory descriptions, and emotional congruence with the events described. She pulled out a photograph and placed it on the table. It showed Emma's upper arm, the fatting bruises still visible in the harsh light of medical photography. These are the photographs taken by Dr. Lisa Park, the pediatrician who examined Emma immediately after the courthouse incident. Dr. Park documented injuries consistent with grab marks, 4 finger-shaped bruises on the posterior upper arm, and 1 thumb-shaped bruise on the anterior aspect. The bruising pattern, size, and placement are consistent with an adult male forcefully grabbing a child's arm. Detective Santos added another document to the growing pile on the table. We pulled Emma's complete medical records going back 3 years. 8 months ago, Emma was brought to her pediatrician by her father with similar bruising on the same arm. At that time, David Martinez claimed the injury occurred when Emma fell from playground equipment. The doctor noted the explanation but didn't file a report because the bruising, while suspicious, could have been consistent with a fall. "But now we have a pattern," interjected. "Same location, same type of injury, separated by 8 months. That's not coincidence." Doctor leaned forward, his file open to pages of handwritten notes. "I've been Emma's court-appointed psychologist for 6 months. During that time, I documented significant anxiety symptoms, particularly around visitation with her father. Emma demonstrated what we call selective mutism in situations involving her father. She would become almost completely nonverbal. Her body language showed classic fear responses: hunched shoulders, avoiding eye contact, physical withdrawal." He pulled out several drawings from his file. "These are pictures Emma drew during our sessions. I use art therapy with children because sometimes they can express through drawing what they can't say with words. Look at this one from 3 months ago." The drawing showed 2 figures, one large, one small, in what appeared to be a room. The large figure was drawn in harsh black lines with jagged edges and an angry red face. The small figure was drawn in light, hesitant pencil strokes, cowering in the corner. Dark scribbles surrounded the large figure, and the small figure had tears drawn streaming down her face. "When I asked Emma to tell me about this picture, she said, 'That's when the loud voice comes,'" Doctor explained, his voice heavy with the weight of recognition that had come too late. "I noted it in her file as anxiety related to parental conflict, but I didn't dig deeper. I didn't see what she was actually telling me." Susan Mitchell placed her own documentation on the table, detailed logs from every therapy dog session Emma had attended. "I started noticing changes in Bailey's behavior around Emma about 4 months ago. I documented it but attributed it to increased bonding between them. Looking back now, I can see the pattern. Emma was systematically training Bailey to respond to her distress signals." She opened her laptop and pulled up video footage from several sessions. "This is from our facility's security cameras. Watch Emma's hands here, see how she practices specific touch patterns on Bailey's head, and watch Bailey's responses. Over time, his reactions become more immediate and more pronounced. This wasn't random. This child was deliberately creating a communication system." Thomas, the CPS investigator, added his thick file to the collection. "I pulled the records from all supervised visitation sessions between Emma and her father over the past 8 months. There are 43 documented visits. In 37 of those visits, the supervising social worker noted that Emma appeared anxious or withdrawn at the beginning of the visit. However, David Martinez's behavior during these supervised visits was described as appropriate, patient, and attentive. "Of course it was," said dryly. "He knew he was being watched. That's classic abuser behavior, complete behavioral control when under observation." "But here's where it gets interesting," continued, flipping through pages. "I cross-referenced the visitation dates with Emma's school attendance records. On 41 out of 43 occasions, Emma wore long-sleeved shirts or sweaters to school on the Monday following weekend visitation with her father. Her teacher noted this pattern but didn't report it because Emma's explanation was always that she was cold or that she liked those particular shirts." Detective Santos pulled out more photographs, these taken by the school nurse with Sarah's permission after the courthouse incident. "Emma's teacher, Mrs. Foster, granted us access to her classroom after Emma's disclosure. Look at Emma's desk as she kept a photograph of Bailey taped to the inside of her desk lid. Mrs. Foster said Emma would often touch the photo during stressful moments, particularly on Mondays after visitation weekends." Ms. Sarah Martinez's attorney opened her own substantial file. "I've been compiling evidence of David Martinez's behavior throughout these proceedings. We have testimony from 3 neighbors at his apartment complex. One neighbor, Mrs. No relation to Doctor, reported hearing very loud yelling and banging sounds coming from David's apartment on multiple occasions when Emma was there for visitation. She noted that it made her uncomfortable, but she didn't know who to call since it wasn't physically violent. Another neighbor, a college student named Williams, reported seeing Emma sitting alone outside the apartment building on 2 separate occasions, looking upset and scared. When he asked if she was okay, she said she was waiting for the yelling to stop." Judge, who had been listening intently to all the evidence, finally spoke. "What about David Martinez's psychological evaluation? He underwent court-ordered evaluation 4 months ago." Pulled out that report and her expression darkened. "Dr. Richard Thornton evaluated him and found him to be emotionally stable with appropriate parenting attitudes. However, Dr. Thornton has since been contacted by our office, and he admitted that David Martinez presented as exceptionally controlled during the evaluation, to the point where Dr. Thornton noted in his private notes, though not in the official report, that the level of behavioral control was almost unnaturally perfect." "What does that mean?" Susan asked. "It means David Martinez is skilled at manipulation," explained. "He can turn his charm on and off like a switch. He knows how to present himself to authorities. It's why these cases are so difficult. The abuser is often more credible, more composed, and more sympathetic than the traumatized child trying to speak truth." Detective Santos added another critical piece of evidence. "We obtained David Martinez's cell phone records with a warrant. In the weeks following Emma's initial disclosure to the first evaluator, the one she mentioned in her forensic interview, David sent 47 text messages to Sarah, many of them aggressive and threatening. Here are a few examples. She read from printed transcripts, "You're poisoning my daughter against me. If you think you're going to take Emma from me, you're insane. I will fight you with everything I have, and I will win. Emma needs to understand that lying has consequences." That last one was sent 2 days before Emma stopped talking to evaluators about her father's behavior. The room fell silent as the implications of that timeline sank in. "We also found something disturbing in his internet search history," Detective Santos continued. "Multiple searches about child custody laws, how to win custody battles, what child abuse investigators look for, and most concerning, can therapy dogs be biased against certain people?" "He knew," Doctor said quietly. "He knew Emma had developed a connection with Bailey, and he was trying to figure out how to discredit it." Gathered all the documents together, her expression grim but determined. "Here's what we have: a pattern of physical abuse documented through medical evidence and photographs, testimony from a credible child whose disclosure is corroborated by multiple sources, behavioral evidence from teachers, neighbors, and mental health professionals, a sophisticated self-protection system created by a child who felt she had no other option." and a defendant whose own communication patterns and search history demonstrate consciousness of guilt. She looked around the table at the assembled team. Evidence doesn't lie. Children sometimes struggle to articulate their trauma, especially when they've been threatened and manipulated. But when you put all the pieces together, the medical evidence, the behavioral patterns, the testimony, the corroborating witnesses, and even the protective response of a trained therapy dog, the picture is crystal clear. David Martinez systematically abused his daughter and manipulated the system to maintain access to her. Judge nodded slowly. I'm issuing a permanent restraining order. All parental rights are suspended pending criminal trial. Sarah Martinez is granted sole legal and physical custody with no visitation rights for David Martinez. We're filing criminal charges, announced. Multiple counts of injury to a child, endangering a child, and witness intimidation. I'm also recommending that the family court initiate termination of parental rights proceedings. Sarah Martinez, who had been sitting silently in the corner with tears streaming down her face, finally spoke. Will Emma have to testify in court? Will she have to see him again? We'll do everything we can to minimize her trauma, assured her. Her forensic interview recording can be used as evidence, but Sarah, your daughter is safe now. The evidence speaks for itself. Emma found a way to tell her truth, and we finally listened. As the meeting adjourned, Susan Mitchell lingered behind, looking at the photograph of Emma and Bailey from the school desk. A little girl who had trained a dog to speak for her when her words weren't enough. A child who had been so desperate to be heard that she'd created her own language of protection. Evidence didn't lie, and neither did a 7-year-old girl who had fought so hard to be believed. The truth was out, documented, corroborated, and undeniable. And now, finally, justice would follow. 2 weeks had passed since the emergency custody hearing that had changed everything. Now, Courtroom 4B was packed to capacity for what Judge had termed a demonstration hearing, an unusual proceeding that would allow the court to see firsthand what Emma had been communicating all along. News of the case had spread through the legal community, and several child advocacy professionals had requested permission to observe. The judge had granted access to a limited number of professionals, believing that what was about to happen could change how courts approached child testimony across the entire state. Emma sat in the back corner again, but this time everything was different. She wore a comfortable purple dress that her mother had let her pick out herself. Her hair was brushed and held back with clips shaped like butterflies. Most importantly, she sat with her shoulders back instead of hunched, her chin up instead of down. Bailey lay beside her, calm and attentive, his therapy dog vest perfectly positioned. Sarah Martinez sat directly behind her daughter, close enough to provide comfort but not so close as to make Emma feel smothered. At the prosecution table, Assistant District Attorney organized her materials with practiced efficiency. Beside her sat Detective Maria Santos and Thomas from CPS. At the defense table, David Martinez sat with his attorney, Mr. Hutchinson, and a new lawyer he'd hired specifically for the criminal charges, a man named Blackwood who specialized in defending difficult cases. David looked different than he had 2 weeks ago. The confident smile was gone, replaced by tight-lipped tension. His suit was still expensive, but he wore it like armor now rather than a costume. The gallery was full of people whose lives had intersected with this case. Susan Mitchell, doctor, Emma's teacher Mrs. Foster, the social workers who had supervised visitations, and several child advocacy professionals who had heard about the unprecedented nature of this hearing. Even Jennifer, the forensic interviewer, had taken a seat in the back row. Judge entered, and everyone rose. As she took her seat at the bench, her eyes swept the courtroom with an intensity that made several people shift uncomfortably. This was a woman on a mission to demonstrate beyond any doubt what had been happening to Emma Martinez, and to ensure it never happened to another child on her watch. This is a highly unusual proceeding, Judge began, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. In my 20 years on the bench, I have never conducted a hearing quite like this one. but I believe the circumstances warrant it. We are here today not just to determine custody of a child, but to demonstrate to this court, to the legal community, and to all those who will review this case in the future, exactly how a 7-year-old girl communicated when her words were not believed. She looked at Emma, her expression softening. "Emma, I know you've been very brave. I need you to be brave one more time today. Can you do that for me?" Emma nodded, her small hand resting on Bailey's head. "Mr. Martinez," Judge continued, turning her attention to David, "you have maintained throughout these proceedings that you are a loving father who has never harmed your daughter. You've claimed that Emma's allegations are false, that she's been coached by her mother, and that the protective behavior of her therapy dog is meaningless. Today, we're going to test those claims." David's attorney stood. "Your Honor, I must object to this entire proceeding. My client's rights." "Your client's rights will be fully protected," Judge cut him off sharply. "But this child's safety takes precedence. Sit down, Mr. Blackwood." The attorney sat, but his expression made it clear he would be filing appeals about this hearing for months to come. Stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Dr. Michael to explain what we're about to demonstrate." Doctor took the stand, was sworn in, and began his testimony. "Over the past 6 months, I've worked extensively with Emma Martinez. What I failed to recognize until recently was that Emma had developed what I now understand to be a sophisticated nonverbal communication system with her therapy dog, Bailey. This system consists of specific tactile signals that Emma uses to communicate her emotional state, specifically when she feels threatened or in danger." He pulled out enlarged photographs showing Emma's hand positions on Bailey's head. "This is the danger signal, 2 taps on the crown of the dog's head, followed by 3 taps on the left ear, followed by 1 tap on the right ear. When Emma executes this signal, Bailey has been trained, by Emma herself, to assume a protective stance." "And you're saying this is a reliable indicator of Emma's fear response?" asked. "I'm saying that Emma created this system because she didn't feel safe using her words. And yes, Bailey's response is a direct reflection of Emma's emotional state. Dogs, particularly therapy dogs, are extraordinarily sensitive to human emotions. Bailey isn't responding to random stimuli. He's responding to specific signals from Emma that indicate she feels threatened." Nodded. "Your Honor, we'd like to conduct a demonstration. With the court's permission, we'll ask Emma some neutral questions while she's seated in the back of the courtroom. We'll observe her behavior and Bailey's responses. Then, we'll ask Mr. Martinez to simply stand and approach the witness stand, not to threaten, not to speak, just to move through the courtroom as he would during normal proceedings. We believe Bailey's response will be immediate and unambiguous." David's attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is theatrical nonsense. You're going to convict my client based on how a dog behaves. This isn't evidence, it's a circus act." "Mr. Blackwood," Judge said coldly, "if your client has nothing to hide, then there should be no issue with this demonstration, unless you're afraid of what we might see." The attorney's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He sat down heavily. "Proceed," Judge instructed. Walk to the back of the courtroom where Emma sat with Bailey. "Emma, I'm going to ask you some simple questions. Just answer naturally, okay?" "Okay," Emma said softly. "What's your favorite color?" "Purple." "What's your favorite food?" "Mac and cheese." "Do you like school?" "Yes, I like reading." Throughout this exchange, Bailey remained calm and relaxed at Emma's feet. His tail wagged gently, his ears were in a neutral position, and his body language showed no signs of stress or alertness. The courtroom watched, transfixed. "Thank you," Emma said. She turned to David Martinez. "Mr. Martinez, I'm now going to ask you to stand and walk toward the witness stand. Don't say anything. Don't look at Emma. Just walk normally to the front of the courtroom as if you were being called to testify." David stood slowly, his face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. Every eye in the courtroom was on him as he stepped into the aisle and began walking toward the front. He moved deliberately, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. Emma's reaction was immediate. The moment her father stood up, her entire body tensed. Her hand flew to Bailey's head, and her fingers moved in that now familiar pattern. 2 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, 1 tap. Bailey's transformation was startling in its speed. The calm, relaxed therapy dog became a vigilant protector in less than 2 seconds. He stood immediately, positioning his body squarely between Emma and her approaching father. His ears flattened against his head. His tail stopped wagging. His muscles tensed, and from deep in his chest came a low, rumbling growl that carried through the silent courtroom. David stopped walking, frozen in place about 20 feet from Emma. "Mr. Martinez, continue walking," Judge instructed. David took another step forward. Bailey's growl intensified, and the dog took a step forward as well, maintaining his protective position. Emma's hand remained on his head, her fingers trembling, her face pale and drawn. "That's enough," Judge said. "Mr. Martinez, please return to your seat." As David walked back to the defense table, Bailey continued to track his movement, his body still tense, still protective. Only when David sat down did Emma's hand move down Bailey's back in that long, smooth stroke, the all-clear signal. Bailey's body relaxed slightly, though he remained more alert than he had been before. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Several of the child advocacy professionals in the gallery were wiping tears from their eyes. Mrs. Foster, Emma's teacher, covered her mouth with both hands. Sarah Martinez was crying openly, her shoulders shaking. Turned to face the gallery, then the judge. "Your Honor, what we just witnessed is not a trained response to a stranger. It's a specific, targeted protective response to one individual, David Martinez. This response is triggered by Emma's danger signal, which she only uses when she feels genuinely threatened. We've tested this. Emma has been in the presence of dozens of people over the past 2 weeks, male and female, adults and children, familiar and unfamiliar. Bailey shows no protective behavior toward any of them. His response is specific to David Martinez." She paused, letting that sink in. "But just to be absolutely clear, let me approach Emma myself," walked toward Emma and Bailey. The dog's tail wagged. He remained calm and relaxed, knelt beside Emma. "You're doing great, sweetie." She stood and returned to the front of the courtroom. No response. "Now, Your Honor, I'd like to ask Thomas to approach Emma." The CPS investigator, a large man in his 40s, walked toward Emma. Bailey watched him with mild interest but showed no protective behavior, smiled at Emma, gave her a thumbs up, and returned to his seat. "One more demonstration," said. "Susan Mitchell, would you please approach Emma?" Susan walked to Emma's corner. Bailey's tail wagged enthusiastically. This was his trainer, someone he trusted. Susan gave Bailey a treat and patted his head, then returned to her seat. "The evidence is clear," said, her voice ringing with conviction. "Bailey doesn't protect Emma from all men. He doesn't protect her from authority figures. He doesn't protect her from strangers. He protects her from David Martinez. And he does so because Emma, through her own creativity and desperate need to be heard, taught him to recognize when she feels threatened by her father." Judge looked at David Martinez with an expression of barely controlled fury. "Mr. Martinez, I've seen many things in this courtroom over the years. I've watched parents lie, manipulate, and deceive to get what they want. But what I just witnessed is perhaps the most damning evidence I've ever seen in a custody case. Your own daughter's fear of you is so profound, so deeply ingrained, that she created an entire communication system to warn others when you're near." David's attorney stood, his face red. "Your Honor, this proves nothing. The dog could have been trained by the mother to respond this way." "Sit down," Judge snapped. "I've heard enough. Sarah Martinez has sole physical and legal custody of Emma. David Martinez's parental rights are terminated pending criminal trial. This court finds clear and convincing evidence of abuse. We're adjourned." The gavel came down with a thunderous crack that echoed like a gunshot through the courtroom. As people began to file out, Emma remained in her corner with Bailey, but for the first time in months, she was smiling. She'd been heard. She'd been believed. And she'd done it not just with words, but with the unbreakable bond she shared with a golden retriever who had learned to speak her language of fear and hope. The courtroom revelation was complete, and justice, at long last, had arrived. 6 months had passed since that extraordinary day in courtroom 4B, when a 7-year-old girl and her golden retriever had demonstrated a truth that words alone could not convey. The Texas spring had given way to a blazing summer, and now autumn leaves were beginning to drift across the grounds of the county courthouse. But inside Judge Chambers, the atmosphere was warm with something that had been absent from this case for far too long: hope. Emma Martinez walked into the judge's office with a confidence that would have been unimaginable 8 months ago. She wore jeans, a bright yellow t-shirt with a sunflower on it, and sneakers that lit up when she walked. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her smile, genuine and unguarded, transformed her entire face. Beside her, as always, walked Bailey, though his therapy dog vest had been replaced with a regular collar and leash. He was no longer Emma's court-appointed protector. He was simply her dog now, adopted by Sarah Martinez as a permanent member of their family. Sarah followed her daughter into the chambers, looking equally transformed. The dark circles under her eyes had faded, replaced by a healthy glow. Her shoulders, which had carried the weight of fear and desperation for so long, now sat straight and relaxed. She held Emma's backpack in one hand and a folder of documents in the other. Not legal documents this time, but Emma's report card and drawings from art class. Emma, Judge stood from behind her desk, her formal judicial demeanor melting into warmth. Look at you. You've grown at least 2 inches since I last saw you. 3 inches, Emma corrected proudly. Mom measured me last week, and I lost 2 teeth. She grinned, showing the gaps where her front teeth had been. Judge laughed, a sound her clerks said they rarely heard. Well, you look wonderful. Come sit down. I want to hear everything about how you've been doing. Emma settled into one of the comfortable chairs across from the judge's desk, Bailey lying contentedly at her feet. Sarah took the chair beside her daughter, her hand resting gently on Emma's shoulder, a gesture of connection rather than protection. School is really good, Emma began, her voice clear and strong, so different from the frightened whisper that had characterized her testimony months ago. I'm in 2nd grade now, and my teacher is Mrs. She's really nice. She lets me bring Bailey to class once a week for show and tell, and all the kids love him. I've been teaching some of them the hand signals, the good ones, I mean, like sit and stay and come. Not the other ones. You don't need those signals anymore, do you? Judge asked gently. Emma shook her head firmly. No, I don't need to tell Bailey I'm scared, because I'm not scared anymore. I'm safe now. She said it with the simple certainty of a child who had reclaimed her sense of security. Judge felt her throat tighten with emotion. She'd been a family court judge long enough to know that not every story ended this way. Too many children fell through the cracks, were returned to dangerous situations, or carried their trauma into adulthood without ever finding healing. But Emma had not only survived but was thriving. Your Honor, Sarah said, pulling out papers from her folder, I wanted to show you these. This is Emma's report card from her first quarter of 2nd grade. Straight A's. And look at this. Her teacher wrote a note. Judge took the report card and read the handwritten comment at the bottom. Emma is a joy to have in class. She's helpful with other students, creative in her work, and shows remarkable resilience and emotional intelligence for her age. She's truly blossoming this year. I'm so proud of you, Emma, the judge said, handing the report card back. You've worked very hard to heal and grow. I go to therapy every week, Emma explained matter-of-factly. With Doctor, we talk about feelings and memories and stuff. At first it was hard because I had to remember the bad things, but Doctor says that remembering and talking about them helps them hurt less. And he's right. It doesn't hurt as much now when I think about what happened. That's because you're incredibly brave, Judge said. Do you know what happened with your father's case? Emma nodded, her expression becoming more serious. Mom told me he went to jail. Sarah interjected, wanting to provide the full context. David was convicted on 3 counts of injury to a child and 1 count of witness intimidation. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. His parental rights were permanently terminated. He can never legally contact Emma again, even after he's released. Judge nodded. The criminal trial was one of the shortest I've seen for a case of this nature. The jury watched the video from the demonstration hearing, heard Emma's forensic interview, and reviewed all the evidence. They deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict. Will he ever try to find me? Emma asked, a small tremor in her voice, the only remaining echo of her former fear. No, sweetheart, Sarah said firmly, squeezing Emma's shoulder. He can't. And even if he tried, there are laws and people whose job it is to keep you safe. Judge, the police, me, we're all here to make sure you stay safe. Bailey, sensing the slight shift in Emma's emotional state, lifted his head and nuzzled her hand. Emma smiled and stroked his ears, not a signal, just affection. Judge shifted the conversation to lighter topics. I heard you've become quite the celebrity, Emma. There was an article in the Texas Law Journal about your case. Emma nodded enthusiastically. A reporter lady came to talk to us. She didn't use my real name. She called me Emma M. to keep me private. She wrote about how I taught Bailey to help me. Mom says lots of judges and lawyers read it. They did, Judge confirmed. And because of your story, Emma, we've made changes, big changes. Would you like to hear about them? Emma leaned forward, interested. Yes, please. Well, the judge began, we've created something called the Bailey Protocol. It's named after your dog. Now, in every custody case in this county where there's a therapy dog involved, the dog handlers are specially trained to recognize when children are trying to communicate through their animals. We've also implemented new guidelines for evaluating child testimony, making sure that when children try to tell us something, we listen more carefully and believe them more readily. Emma's eyes widened. Really? Because of me and Bailey? Because of you and Bailey, Judge confirmed. Your story has already helped other children find their voices. Some kids are using art, some are using music, some are using therapy animals like you did. But the most important thing is that adults are learning to listen in new ways. That's good, Emma said quietly. I don't want other kids to be as scared as I was. Sarah pulled out another paper from her folder. Your Honor, I also wanted to show you this. Emma wrote it for a school assignment about heroes. Her teacher thought it was so good that they entered it in a district-wide writing competition. Emma won first place. Judge took the paper and began to read Emma's careful, second-grade handwriting. My Hero Bailey. By Emma Martinez. My hero is my dog Bailey. He is a golden retriever and he has soft fur and brown eyes. Bailey became my hero when I was really scared and nobody understood. I taught him a secret language with my hands. When I tapped his head a special way, he knew I needed protection. He would stand between me and the scary thing and keep me safe. Bailey helped grown-ups finally understand what I was trying to say. He showed them I was telling the truth. Because of Bailey, I am safe now. Because of Bailey, I learned that even when words don't work, there are other ways to tell your story. Bailey is my hero because he listened when nobody else would, and now he's just my best friend. We don't need the secret language anymore because I'm not scared, but I will never forget how he saved me. The end. Judge had to blink rapidly to clear the tears from her eyes. Emma, this is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I drew a picture to go with it, Emma said, pulling out a colorful drawing from her backpack. It showed a little girl and a golden dog standing under a rainbow, holding hands or paws, both smiling. The sun was shining and flowers bloomed all around them. "May I keep a copy of this?" Judge asked. "I'd like to frame it and put it in my office. It will remind me why I do this job." "You can keep the original," Emma said generously. "I can make another one." As the visit drew to a close, Judge walked around her desk and knelt down to Emma's level, something she almost never did, but this child deserved to be met as an equal. "Emma, I want you to know something important. What happened to you wasn't your fault. Not even a little bit. You were a child who needed adults to protect you, and for a while we didn't do a good enough job. But you never gave up. You found a way to make us hear you. And now, because of your courage, we're better at protecting other children." Emma thought about this for a moment, then said something with the profound wisdom that sometimes only children possess. "I think grown-ups forget sometimes that kids have important things to say. Maybe they just need to remember to really listen. Not just with their ears, but with their eyes and their hearts too." "You're absolutely right," Judge said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I promise you I will never forget that lesson." As Sarah and Emma prepared to leave, Emma turned back at the door. "Judge, thank you for listening to Bailey. Thank you for believing us." "Thank you for teaching me how to listen better," the judge replied. After they left, Judge stood at her window, watching Emma and Sarah walk across the courthouse grounds toward their car. Bailey trotted beside them, his tail wagging, just a dog taking a walk with his family. No vest, no signals, no protection protocols. Just love and trust and the simple joy of being together. On her desk, Emma's drawing caught the afternoon sunlight. Judge picked it up and studied it, the little girl and her dog, safe and happy under that rainbow. She thought about all the children who would pass through her courtroom in the years to come, and she made a silent vow to honor what Emma had taught her. That sometimes the most important testimony doesn't come in words, and that listening, truly listening, requires more than just hearing what is said aloud. That evening, the Bailey Protocol was officially implemented across all family courts in county. Within a year, it would be adopted by courts across Texas, and eventually, across the nation. Emma's story became a teaching case in law schools, psychology programs, and child advocacy training. The little girl who had been silenced by fear had become a voice for countless others. And somewhere in Austin, Texas, Emma Martinez was doing her homework at the kitchen table, Bailey's head resting on her feet, living the normal, safe, happy childhood that every child deserves. She had taught a dog to speak for her when her words weren't enough. But more importantly, she had taught the adults around her how to truly listen. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most powerful truths, and sometimes those voices speak through pause instead of words. But in the end,